Great. Appreciate everybody joining us. I'm just going to look for one thing here real quick. We talked last week. I was mentioning the rain in the park outside our house and everything. And people were asking how bad is it? And I figured, when you used to go to the movies, they would have the cartoons and everything beforehand, and then you'd have the main features. So today we're going to have the short subject first, and then our featured speakers. So 1 second here. Optimize for video clip, share screen.
Previews of coming attractions.
Yes, think of this as just something to keep you busy. So here's share screen.
News of the world.
You're right. We've been getting a little water in our park.
Now, how close to your house is this?
Look out my window, I'm looking at it.
Boy, that is brown.
Yeah, it's
really
muddy runoff.
Silt as it comes through the mountains behind the mountain.
It's all topsoil.
Yep.
It looks like it's still within the banks, though.
It's really rolling in.
Oh, you can tell them about the young man who got pulled across the stream.
Yeah, I'll do that in a second. So they shot here of a bridge, and the water to put into the at night had gone over the top of the bridge. So luckily, you see the dirt on either side, like going to the tree to the right, that was all here's the bridge. At night, 2 nights earlier, had gone over the top of this bridge. So yeah, we were out walking our dog, and the guy was a young kid, teenager with a German Shepherd on the other side of the stream that decided it needed to get to our dogs to say hello, so it dragged him right through it.
That he wasn't happy.
No, luckily it was a nice dog. This, to put in perspective, is about 2 for water.
Still getting more rain out there, aren't we?
Yep, more rain to Thursday this week. Almost done. Watching this, everybody was putting his eye, they have to run to the restroom.
Of course.
How
Well,
many feet is that below your house?
it's hard to say. We're actually it's across the street, and then there's probably, I don't know, how far would you say, Carol, 30 feet of park or something before we get to the stream?
Yeah, probably. And I guess it goes a little downhill towards the stream.
Yeah, we're downhill. A number of years ago, we actually had worse rain and weather than this, and it came out to about 20 feet off the banks on either side of the stream.
Wow.
And it got under the bridges and lifted a bunch of them off their foundation, and they had to all be reseeded. So when we had the earthquake, we had to move out of our house, and then we were rebuilding it for about a year. And when the kids were taking all the scrap wood that was left from the construction, we'd go across the street and make boats, and they'd float them down. So somewhere down there is about 200 boats jam up some pipe. When we, and we've always liked the stream. Well, when it starts raining so much, and you see it go up to the banks, go over the bridge, come start in your direction. Like I said, luckily we're at a small hill, and then our house is even on our side of the street on a hill above that. So if the water ever got to our house, it would mean that there'd be about 2.7 million people underwater down below us. So, you know,
What's really neat is that if we look straight out to the park from our house, we see the stream. And then if we turn around and look back, we see the mountains behind us. It's right now just gorgeously green.
yeah, it's really pretty. They're all full of lupin and wildflowers and really pretty. Unfortunately, you know, let's see, in about 4 months, we'll be tinder and we'll be evacuating for fires. But anyway, I keep mentioning our dry stream is not dry. So with that, no further introduction or ado, I will turn it over to Don Lancaster, who's going to beam us aboard.
Yeah. While I'm shifting over, did you get any of those tornadoes? Tornado near you?
No, the nearest tornado would have been about 50 miles from us, which was close enough. I've been through one tornado. I don't need to go through another. We watched it on the news, and you know, wow. The thing that was interesting, they had a teacher wanted to see what all the noise was outside the classroom, and she opened the door, and the wind literally sucked her out. So if you live in a tornado area, one of the things they tell you is you don't open doors or windows. Here, you know, they teach everybody what to do for earthquakes, but you know, tornado, I wonder what that is. Whew, right out the door. So luckily she was okay.
I think you completed the disaster trifecta with the earthquakes, floods, and tornadoes. I think you got them all now.
No. The locusts are due in soon.
Okay, yeah, that's true.
We still got brush fires too.
Yeah, no, don't. As I said, you know, you look at everything green and you go, wow, this is great. You know, the optimist in you says how beautiful, and then the pessimist says brush fire. Well, thanks, Don. Oh, wow, we got a plane like that sitting in Burbank on a pole like that.
Well, did they steal your plane?
No, that's at the Burbank Museum. Last I saw.
All righty. So can everyone see the Space Center Houston sign?
Yes.
Yep.
Good. Okay. Last time I did this, you saw the notes instead, which was I had to think of tap dancing.
Don, real quick, I'm just going to mute everybody, and then you'll have to unmute yourself, but that way you can get through the chat without any background noise.
All right. All righty, I'm back. So, yeah, basically, we're going to take a tour of Space Center Houston. Actually, not so much Space Center Houston, but the Johnson Space Center. If any of you have ever been to Houston to the NASA installation down there, it's actually broken up into two parts. One part is the Johnson Space Center, which is the actual place where NASA does its business. And then attached to that is Space Center Houston, which is more of an educational tourist type place. That's a museum. They're the ones who give tours of the Johnson Space Center. So all right, you can't go directly into Johnson Space Center. You got to go in through Space Center Houston here. We are going to be looking at a tour, which is not their standard tour. I'll talk a little bit about their standard tours and the tour we took here in a minute. Let's see if the slide will change. There we go. When you pull in Space Center Houston, they're just outside the parking lot. You're going to find this huge 747 with a space shuttle on top. Houston didn't get one of the original space shuttles. Instead, they got the 747 that was used to fly them around the country. And they took a mock-up shuttle there and put it on top there. You can go through both of these on your tour, and we won't be doing that in the slideshow. If I were to give you an entire tour of Space Center Houston, we'd be here for 3 hours. But we're here mostly for the Johnson Space Center portion of this. However, I did take a few pictures that I thought you folks would find interesting. Those of you who know the shuttle know that once it landed back on Earth, they would transport it to the next base, the next place it needed to be via 747. And it was hooked on by these white rods that you can see on top. You can see one there. And I found it humorous that we could prove the engineers had a sense of humor. You can't get up to that white rod, but NASA actually pulled a sign off of that and put it down where the public could see it. It's this sign right here. Note attach orbiter here and notice black side down, just in case someone thought of inverting the orbiter to put it on there. So I thought that was quite wonderful. You actually have to look for this. It's just a little sign off to the side of the shuttle. You have to look for it kind of closely. There are lots of various things you can see when you visit Space Center Houston. They have some standard free tours that include in cost of admission, and they'll take you to various places around Johnson Space Center. One of those places is this is where they keep their Saturn V laid down on the side so you can examine it. If you've never seen a Saturn V in purpose, I highly recommend you do so. They have one in Florida and they have one here. These things are huge. I mean, they're massive. If you look at the people down here, those people aren't that far away from me. And you can see compared to the rocket, they're just tiny. So I could not get a good picture of the rocket. It's so big that I would have to use panorama, and it didn't work out. But anyway, so if you go there, you can take a tour and see this. Also in the museum, there are lots of fascinating displays. It wasn't there this last time we visited, but normally they have on display this podium. This podium was from Rice University, and it's the podium from which Kennedy gave his famous speech about choosing to go to the moon and the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. That was where he delivered that speech from. And you can go around and examine the thing. I think it's up in for restoration right now, but it's usually out there on display. They also have a lot of space artifacts. This is the Apollo 17 command module. And I've always been amazed. You look inside, there are 3 seats. You can't see the one to the right. Imagine spending a week and a half in that capsule with 3 men. I mean, it just boggles my mind. It's very cramped quarters. Now, granted, there's more space underneath the couches here, but this was a very small space. And you can't get too close, obviously. They have the thing wired, but I got way down on my knees and pointed the camera up to get the control console. I wanted to hopefully see if I could read any of the buttons, but I didn't get that close in. We'll get back to this vest in a little bit, but this is Gene Kranz's vest. Gene Kranz was the flight controller for most of the Apollo missions, and every time he went in, he wore a different vest. They were made by his wife. This is the final vest he wore during Apollo 17, and they got it on display there. I thought this was funny. They have a team. We're going to see more about this shuttle mission simulator, but they have a team called the Raptor team, and they were designed to put the shuttle pilots and a whole shuttle crew basically through hell, running every situation they could think of. So one of the crews took up this little Raptor into space as a salute to the Raptor team who'd given them so much trouble. But the main reason we're here is not the Space Center itself, or not the museum itself. It is highly worth a visit. I recommend it. But we're here to tour the actual Space Center. And this was something I've been wanting to do for a long time. Basically, I've been wanting to get to mission control and see inside it. And that was the purpose of this trip. Now, there are behind-the-scenes tours you can take. I told you there are a lot of free ones that come with your admission that will take you into places like the mission control, except you can't get as many access privileges. They'll also take you to some of the rocket farms and such, and they're well worth doing. But if you want to really get in and see things, you need to get one of their what they call VIP tours. They do have a separate cost, and you want the one in the morning. Trust me on this one. They have one in the morning and one in the afternoon. They only take 16 people a day, and they only do them on Mondays through Fridays. Okay. The one in the morning actually starts out before Space Center opens, which caused us a bit of concern. We got there an hour early, and the whole place was closed, and there were no signs or anything. My ticket said, "Follow the signs to your tour." There was nothing. Well, as it turns out, the tour starts an hour before the place opens. We just happened to stumble upon it where they were collecting people. But the afternoon tour does not go to the same places the morning tour goes, and trust me, you want to go to the places the morning tour goes. Okay, so there are 3 stops on the morning tour, and they don't sound very interesting. The first one is the Crew Systems Laboratory, second is the Shuttle Avionics Integration Lab, and finally the Mission Control Center. So we'll start out in the Crew Systems Laboratory. The Crew Systems Laboratory is where they test. One of the main things they do here is test spacesuits. And so they have a lot of historical suits here that we got to view. This was Gus Grissom's suit from the Liberty Bell mission, Mercury 7. which is, this was the suit he was wearing when that capsule sank out in the middle of the ocean, which actually the fact that his hatch blew off the capsule during that mission caused a change in the capsule design so that the hatch could only be opened from the inside rather than from the outside. That in turn caused Gus Grissom to lose his life during the Apollo 1 mission because they couldn't open the capsule door in time. But this was his spacesuit from the Liberty or the Mercury 7 mission. We also have a prototype moon suit for moonwalking. This was not ever actually flown. We have a shuttle suit for spacewalking. What's fascinating about this one is if you notice all this equipment mounted on the front, that is actually where the tools in the toolkit was placed because these suits are not very flexible. So the astronauts had all their tools mounted right there on their chest. And so that's unique to the shuttle suits that they had this whole mounting for tools. This is the orange suit is the normal shuttle suit that they wore during takeoffs and landings. And there you can see them. Picture this room. We're going to be there again soon. This is the crew compartment, and that's somebody waiting to go up there. It's called the lower deck. We'll get there. This suit, we're back at the museum for just a minute because I couldn't miss this suit. This was actually Pete Conrad's suit from Apollo 17. And what's fascinating about this suit, I don't know if you can see it, but if you look at his shoes, they're not very clean, right? And actually his pants aren't either. The whole suit is kind of dirty. That's moon dust. They had a real problem with the Apollo suits. They discovered that the moon soil, lunar soil, has spiky edges and it grabbed onto everything. And so the suit became filthy. It got in the module. There was dust everywhere, and they couldn't figure out any way to do anything about it. For the Artemis missions that are coming up and our next moon mission, they're designing whole new suits just to deal with this problem. But if you look at this suit and get real up close, you can't really see it here, but you can see the sneakers or the shoes are very dirty, the pants are dirty. These things came back coated in moon dust. Okay, we're moving from that building to the Shuttle Avionics Integration Laboratory. This is where they tested almost all the equipment for the shuttle and did other things as well. Apparently, because people ask a lot, there was a whole display on toilets in space. So this was a toilet they tested there for the basically for the astronauts to use in space. It almost seemed like a fascination. They mentioned the toilets 3 or 4 times. I guess guests really want to know about space toilets. They also tested all the shuttle, most of the shuttle components here. Here they had a landing gear simulator to stress the not the landing gear itself, but the instrumentation and equipment that drove the landing gear in the shuttle. And they have a flight computers from one of the shuttles here. I don't know if they're testing anymore. I found these fascinating. The shuttle had 5 computers. That way that if one went bad, they could tell because it wouldn't agree with the other computers. The majority of the computers won. They were not very powerful. Any one of your desktop PCs could easily beat these things, but they had a couple on display here. And this console actually tells you a little bit about what this building was actually used for. This is an RTC console, a test console that was used to feed in simulations and test programs when they were running tests on the shuttle itself. But to do that, you need a shuttle. So if you turn around from here, you're going to see something that looks a little bit like the server room from hell. Basically, it looks like a room that's surrounded a giant metal cage with tons of cables and everything running from it. From the outside, it just looks like a mess. And it's hard to tell what the heck you're looking at. But if you go to the very back, you'll find there's a door. And what you are looking at is actually a shuttle, full-size shuttle that they built just for this. No skin, no wings, no tail. But inside, it's corrected every way with all the equipment, all the avionics, all the instrumentation, everything installed in there. And this is where they ran their tests on equipment. And also, they trained astronauts in here quite a bit so they could get to know the shuttle like the back of their hands. Now, when you take a normal tour, they'll just point through there and say this is what it is. But on this tour, the behind-the-scenes tour, and I do recommend that you do this, they let you go in. And so in we go into this little known shuttle that most people don't know exists. And you know, it's a real head hazard to have these support beams that are about 5.5 feet there. So really easy to crack your skull on these things. And like I said, any of you who ever worked in computers, this would be the worst server room you've ever seen in your life. There's wires everywhere. This is our guide here explaining what they did. Basically, one of the training exercises they would do here is they put the pilots in the cockpit of this thing. And they would say, okay, you're going to do this operation. And they would push a button. They say, okay, now what is connected? And they've had to trace the wiring all the way back from the console, back through here to each junction. Then they would say, okay, find this wire, this cable, this junction, this component. And the astronauts had to be able to go in and find those things, every last component on the shuttle. And they drilled them again and again and again until they knew this thing like the back of their hand. So if something went wrong in space, they would know where the problem, they could diagnose the problem. Rather than having to follow all the wires, you know, right then. They know where everything is, what's connected to everything, and how it all interacts. And most of that training is done right here in this shuttle, or was done here. The shuttle is now decommissioned. And just everywhere you look, there's components everywhere. Just each one of these bundles, by the way, is labeled with a number. If you're looking for a component or a cable, they have a booklet they can look up, and they can find the bundle number and go from there. So the goal was, okay, find this junction for this component with this cable, and they would send them off on a treasure hunt. And if you stand in a room and look at everything that's there, it seems nearly impossible to be able to do that off the top of your head. As I said, it is actually a full-size shuttle, just without wings or skin or bay doors. So what you're looking at right now is the view you would see in the shuttle if you looked out the airlock. So you're looking into the cargo bay towards the tail. The crew compartments are directly behind you. And you can see it's a fairly good sized room in here. It's 1-to-1 match to the shuttle. Now, while you're standing in the shuttle bay, you'll see there's a ladder that goes up into this little room here. That ladder leads to the flight, not the flight deck, but the crew compartment, mid deck. Okay, where the airlock is located up in here, and they had basically they could put chairs if they had more than 4 astronauts on a flight. The lavatory is here. A lot of things are located in here, and they let us climb up in there. This gets really cramped. I can't begin to tell you, once you climb up this ladder, how cramped things get. Here's the layout of the front part of the shuttle. Now, what we're looking at here is the airlock. You can see that to our right. So that's the door we were just looking through. The airlock's not installed on the simulation shuttle. And so we're going to be going into this room here, and there's a ladder that goes up to the flight deck as well. Now, it's hard to get a sense of scale. The astronauts here look actually fairly comfortable, lots of room, but here's what you're actually looking at for room. This is the flight deck, the upper deck. If one adult 3, stood with their arms outstretched, and then adults 1 and 2 stood behind them in front with their arms outstretched as well, everybody could touch the walls, okay? And if you just stood on tippy toes, your head would meet the ceiling. So you're not looking at a lot of space. And those are the walls. That's before equipment is installed. Okay. So once you get up there, especially on the flight deck, this thing is incredibly cramped. And if you have 7 people on a mission, I don't know how they all did that in a week. So we're looking at the lower deck now, out through the door to get a sense of how small it is. The reason they only run 16 people per tour is because they can't fit more than 8 people into this thing at one time. Even with our group, which had 7, it was really crowded. So we're looking at what would be the airlock towards the crew, towards the bay. If you turn to the right, there's a ladder that goes up to the flight deck. Now, they will let you climb up there, which for some stupid reason I decided to do along with my wife. My wife took this picture. Up on the flight deck, it's a full recreation of a functioning shuttle. Everything is there, and they'll run simulations here. Like I said, they'll have astronauts flip switches on a component, then track the whole thing through the shuttle, the wirings and the junctions and everything, so they know everything backwards and forward. Every shuttle astronaut trains in this thing, every last one, or they train. We don't fly it anymore. Thought you'd like to see the whole thing laid out a little bit better. They did tell us if we wanted to, we could climb into the flight commander's chair. the pilot chair, the commander's chair. I chose not to, and most people chose not to, because it is not designed to be climbed into that way. The chairs actually pull back and swivel, but we weren't allowed to do that. And I didn't want to go climbing all over the consoles and things to get in here. So I just stood behind and took pictures. But, you know, I'm taking this picture. I'm standing directly below the pilot's, behind the pilot's chair. The wall is 3 feet behind me. And there would be 4 people in this area during takeoff. It could be quite cramped. Bill, I thought you'd like to see the flight controls, just because, yeah, your love of flying. This is a little more sophisticated than the last Beechcraft I flew.
Yeah, it's I was looking at it, said I'd probably get in the seat, but I don't know if I could get back out. But yeah, my plane would fly with a stick, but nothing like this.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I actually think I might have been able to get in too, but just getting back to the ladder behind the commander's seat, I actually ended up having to get down. My wife and I were the only ones up there. We went up in groups of 2. She went down first. I actually had to sit on the floor and then lie down and slide forward, then sit back up to get to the ladder to get out. It was incredibly tricky, and everybody I talked to had the same problems. Alrighty, so that is a lot of people don't know that shuttle even exists, but like I said, every shuttle astronaut's been in there through simulations and wiring diagrams. It was just a hoot. We spent 20 minutes in that thing, crawling all over it. It was a lot of fun. But my main reason to go was this room you're seeing here. Okay, and this is not a current picture, not even close. NASA had 2 flight control or mission control rooms built, one right on top of each other. This was the second one, and it's called Historic Mission Control. This was the mission control for most of the Apollo missions, including Apollo 11 and Apollo 13. When the Apollo program was discontinued, it was then used a little bit for Skylab, and then eventually for most of the shuttle missions. When the shuttle missions were discontinued, this thing was basically decommissioned. They turned off and disconnected all the power, and they just let it sit. It was a national landmark, so they couldn't destroy it, but they just let it sit, getting dirty and dusty. On the consoles, most of the console things there you see in this picture, which was taken when it was decommissioned, are not original to the room. They're shuttle components, okay? Many things were moved out, things were cannibalized, they were broken, nothing worked anymore. The carpet was old and falling apart. It was dark, it was dirty, it was dusty. The thing was just a crying shame. So basically what happened is about 5 years before the 50th anniversary of the moon landing, Gene Kranz and a bunch of other former flight directors and crew from the Apollo missions decided that this thing needed to be restored. And they did a crowdfunding on the internet. I was actually pleased to be a part of that crowdfunding. And they restored the whole thing for the 50th anniversary of the moon landing. But they raised $5 million in funding. They got other sources. They barely made it. It was done on time. So what you see here is it looks kind of cool, but but what they did was turn it into this. Okay, this is the restored mission control. Right now, you're looking from the observation room, and they went back and restored the whole thing to the state it was in on the day of the lunar landing of Apollo 11. Okay, they were meticulous. We'll talk about how meticulous in a few minutes, but they actually worked very hard, and they created a presentation so that those people, you can come in on any of the tours and sit in this observation room that we're looking at right now, and they'll run a show for you which runs you through the moon landing, the reading of the plaque on the moon, and the return of the Apollo 11 capsule splashdown. While that show is going on, you hear all the audio that was playing at that time. You see on the screen exactly what was playing, and all the consoles, including the lights on the buttons, go through the exact states they were at that moment during the radio broadcast. So you're watching the lunar landing from mission control just without the people. Okay. Everything is spot on. It's fascinating to watch. I've seen it twice now, and it just sucks me in. It's amazing to see. And And when, as you watch, you get a real sense of just what we were able to accomplish and just with just how little technology we did it with. One example of, oh, I'll get there in a moment. The observation room, oh, Catherine here, oh, she's in. The observation room that we watched this presentation from and what most of the general public gets to see if you take the standard tour, this is the observation room that was there for the entire Apollo program. These are the actual seats. They've been reupholstered and everything's been restored. Notice the little boxes on the seats here? Those are ashtrays, and those are the ashtrays that were there. They tell you don't touch them. We could sit in the seats, but we couldn't touch the ashtrays because they were too fragile. Okay. Big, don't touch anything rule was applied to us here. We were warned very clearly. NASA, she kept referring to them as NASA SWAT team. She said, you don't want to meet NASA SWAT team. But they were very clear that we couldn't touch anything because they want to keep this thing in pristine condition. And only 16 people are admitted each day for that very reason. Off to the left and the right of the observation room, you'll see these little isolated booths. These were for press and government people to be able to make private phone calls away from everyone else. So you could phone in your story back to your editor, or somebody could update their boss in their government agency about what's going on. Okay, there's one to the left side, and there's another one there to the right side. Again, restored to exactly the states they were in during the Apollo missions. Okay. I told you that we did this without a lot of technology. This particular aspect of the thing, this is during the first step on the moon. They play that back too. And they wanted to be able to keep track of where the astronauts were on the moon and also whether or not they were in camera, because they were managing a television broadcast here. So they wanted to have some map where you could see the astronauts moving around, but they couldn't computer animate that. So what they did was they put up a little grid. They put little cutouts of the astronauts. They put a camera above that, and then a hand would come out every now and then and move the cutout of the astronauts. So you can see here, he is moving. I don't know if that's Neil or Buzz, but he's moving one of the astronauts as they moved around. And you notice they have track of the field of view right below it. So they would keep track of where the astronauts were in relation to the orbiter, and they could keep track of whether or not they were on camera just by watching this hand move these little cutout astronauts around the screen. It really surprised me when I watched this for the first time. This hand pops up on a screen and starts moving things around, then it goes back away. It's kind of humorous. But they show you exactly what they saw. They don't hide anything like this. And it just gives you a sense of, wow, how far we've come. Okay. And there, if you see, look on the right there, you can see this was the one where Neil took the first step on the moon. They were playing that back. You notice that there was a TV console here playing it back as well. This particular desk here was not this. I don't know whose station this was, but they had their own TV. These TVs were scattered throughout the thing. And notice all the clutter. Okay, I'll talk about the clutter in a little bit. Every desk is just covered with a ton of clutter, all part of the restoration. And let's see, am I going to? So, again, when you take the standard tour, I think we're on the right side. We take the standard tour, you're looking out from the observation room. Well, I first entered this room in the mid-1980s, right after the shuttle disaster. We took a tour. And as it turns out, Ron Howard was sitting right behind me, but that's a whole different story. I saw it and I said, I want to get in that room because I like to go places and be where things happened. And the observation room was cool, but I wanted to get in here. And I kept trying, and every now and then they'd offer a tour, but by the time I heard about it, they didn't. Well, this time I heard about this tour, and I grabbed it. And so rather than seeing this from the room, this, by the way, is the state of the thing when they brought back the astronauts onto the carrier. You can see the helicopter here, and you can see the mission accomplished slide. So this was, before the astronauts returned to the carrier, this was their last thing they did for Apollo 11. And I've seen this particular show several times, and I've been in this observation room at least 5 times, but never before this last month was I able to do this. This tour included behind-the-scenes access into the room itself. You couldn't go up into the consoles, which I desperately wanted to do, but you can understand why they wouldn't let you. There was a period of time when, before they restored it, they let people go down and sit at the consoles and such, which is how things went missing. But they, of course, no longer do that. And again, you look at everything here, all the clutter. The restoration on this was incredibly detailed. And they had one cardinal rule. Nothing could be placed in mission control that wasn't there during Apollo 11. If it did not exist in the room during Apollo 11, you couldn't put it in here. Okay, so everything you see in this picture was present during Apollo 11. A lot of the team donated things that they had kept. They hit up some museums. They went searching on the internet and found some things, and they had to verify everything. They had to prove authenticity of everything. This goes down to a huge amount of detail. How huge, we'll talk about in a bit, but they collected things like coffee cups that were in the room. They call it the world's ugliest coffee cup collection. Everybody had coffee cups, and they really are ugly. You'll see a few. The briefcases, tape recorders, the coach you see hanging back here, all the logs, everything, they were all there. And the target was, were they there during the moon landing? But I think anything in Apollo 11 qualified. And you actually had to produce a photo showing it in the room before you could put it there, or a film. This is a side view of the second console down. If you look where this blue and black book is here, that is Gene Kranz's console. That's where he ran everything from, was right there. This was as close as I could get to getting in there. They actually will not let you approach these things. There's a alarm system, and there's a set of wooden rails that prevent you from getting from moving through. They're handrails. This photo, some of the photos are a little blurry because in some cases I had to stick my camera up through the handrails, put it on zoom, and raise it up and tilt it down to get the shots I wanted. I always got permission. But yeah, see this coffee cup, world's ugliest coffee cups. You can see this one down here in the lower right-hand corner, for example. It's fascinating, all the stuff that you actually find in here. The room is much bigger than you expect it to be. There is a ton of space. About 1/3 of the space is from the last console to the wall, or the projection wall, which is to our right. My guess is that was so everybody in mission control could see the screens clearly. But there's a ton of empty space at the front of this. Okay. Now, so if you're looking those back windows there, that's the visitors gallery that we were in earlier. And then, let's see. To our left is a little room. That's a little conference room, but this conference room has a huge amount of historic significance. They've changed it up since the Apollo days. Now you got consoles in there, but originally that was where the engineers would meet if there was a problem. And I know most of you are familiar with Apollo 13, but for those who aren't, during Apollo 13, they had an oxygen tank. A spark blew a hole in a tank, blew a hole in the command module, and they were on their way to the moon when that happened. And they had to bring them back alive. They had to put them in, to keep them breathing, they had to put them in the lunar module, which would never land on the moon, and use its oxygen. But it had a problem that it had air filters to keep the carbon monoxide out of the air, and they were breathing in there were more people in the lunar module than it was designed for, so they needed to change the air filter. They wanted to use one from the command module, but here's where the engineering got interesting. The modules on the lunar module, I believe, took round air filters. The ones in the command module took square ones. Okay. But if they didn't solve this problem and get the new air filters, they would have suffocated. The air would have been, they would have been unable to breathe the air. So a bunch of people got together in this room right here, figured out everything the astronauts had at their disposal, and that included socks and duct tape. And they built this. This is from the actual Space Center Museum. This is the prototype that they built in that room in Mission Control and tested, and then took it into the Mission Control room, gave it to Gene Kranz. They talked them through how to do this on Apollo 13. So these components right here that they built in that little conference room off Mission Control saved the lives of the crew of Apollo 13. Kind of neat to be able to just look in that room and think about the history that happened. And this is like, even if you don't take the tour, you can see these. These are displayed in the museum at Space Center. Another angle of mission control, just to give you an idea of the size of the place. And another view on the consoles. I took this picture for a couple of reasons. One, it's just kind of cool to see the consoles. But I also wanted to talk about just how detailed this restoration was. I want you to notice here, there's an ashtray here and another ashtray here. Ashtrays are all over the place. I didn't ask if this was a spittoon or an ashtray, but ashtrays are everywhere. Turns out the people who were the flight crew on the Apollo missions, like everyone else, they smoked like chimneys. But we were told actually that the smoke could get so thick that it was hard to see the screens in the front of the room. Okay. These guys smoke so much that these ashtrays, it's hard to get a sense of scale, but these are almost a foot across. Okay. These are huge, and they would fill up with cigarette butts, just tons of cigarette butts. They went back and interviewed, they brought in everyone they could find still alive who worked in this place. They brought them back to their own consoles, and then they interviewed them about the memories they had. And they asked them about smoking, and a lot of guys said, well, yeah, I didn't smoke, but whatever. But they'd have films of these guys smoking like chimneys. So apparently there's a lot of selective memory going on. But the ashtrays are fascinating because if you look inside, there are cigarette butts. Now remember the rule that said you can't have anything in this room that wasn't there during Apollo 11. That applies to these cigarette butts. When they ripped out the consoles, they found cigarette butts that had fallen off out of the ashtrays or off the desk or whatever, and they were in the floor. They found a ton of cigarette butts, and they collected all of them. And they kept them and put them back in the ashtrays. So they would have genuine ashtrays in their cigarette butts for this restoration. That's the level of detail they went to for this. Now, I mentioned earlier that they have a lot of things. These are the coats and blazers worn by the Apollo 11 controllers. But to my right on this wall is one of my favorite things in the whole room. This was worth the price of admission right here. This is a plaque, and there's a story behind the plaque. When the Apollo 13 crew was preparing to go back to Earth, they needed to put they bring some things over from the lunar module that they were going to jettison. The reason was there was space reserved in the command module for lunar rocks that they never collected, and they needed to compensate for that missing weight. So they grabbed things off the lunar module and stored them where the rocks would be at a close to the approximately same weight, so that the command module would weigh the same and be balanced the same as they had planned for on re-entry. Well, Lovell grabbed this mirror off the leg of the lunar module. They used this mirror to look down, be able to see down as they were climbing down the ladder. He grabbed this mirror as one of the things they took. When he got back, he had the mirror mounted to a plaque, and he presented it to Gene Kranz. And Gene Kranz then had the mirror framed and hung above the drinking fountain in mission control. It's been there ever since. I don't know if you can read the plaque, so I'm going to read it to you. Also note, there is a spelling error on this plaque. It's hilarious. But it says, this mirror flown on Aquarius LM7 to the moon, April 11/17, 1970, returned to a grateful Apollo 13 crew to reflect the image of the people in mission control who got us back. Okay, then the names are down there. The idea being was they wanted them to be able to look into it and think that they are getting a thank you. It's reflecting the people who saved their lives. Gene Kranz hung it over the drinking fountain, so whenever they got a drink, they could look into the mirror from the lunar module of Apollo 13 and see their reflection in a plaque that was thanking the people who saved their lives. So it's a really neat thing to have. And it is the original plaque. We know this because the word grateful was misspelled by the trophy company. It's spelled Greatful. And that misspelling is still there. They haven't bothered to fix it. It's still hanging there. So that's the original plaque. I actually took a selfie in that mirror. I didn't save anybody, but it was a great, great thing to have. And I just think it's a cool picture. You're seeing a piece of the 13 lunar module. You're seeing the reflection of mission control, and you're seeing a thank you for all the people who saved that crew's life. It's just a neat item. Again, another view of mission control from the front here. And looking here, this here again, see the blue notebook. The blue notebook is how you could look in. This was your Gene Kranz set. And all the stretchers lying around, people's briefcases, a thermos from those days, all of it's original. Another console shot. I actually do plan to go find a shot and cut a black and white photo of Gene Kranz at his console into this photo. I haven't gotten around to doing it yet. Okay, and one last shot, but before we go, there's one more story of Mission Control, and we got one more room to visit after this, by the way. But I want you to look here to the right side of the photo. You're going to see a vase of roses here. Okay, these roses normally would sit just under the screen at the front of Mission Control, but because 16 people are let in every day to tromp through that area, they put it here where we couldn't get to it, so we couldn't, cause a mess, basically. But normally they're not there. It's one of the few things that is not in the position it's supposed to be. But the roses have a story. After the shuttle disaster, the next flight that Mission Control was used for, remember they went from Apollo and then they used this for the shuttle for a while. The next flight was STS-26. And a family in Texas, no one knew who they were at the time, but they've since been identified as a family known as the Sheltons, decided it would be nice after the whole tragedy these people had experienced to give them something nice. So they sent them some roses, and those roses were placed in Mission Control. And then from that time on, for every shuttle mission, they sent roses to Mission Control. And they became known as a good luck charm. As a matter of fact, so much so that if those roses were not there on time, the crew would worry that they were being jinxed. They saw it as a good luck charm, and the roses weren't present. The crew would think they were jinxed. And the guide told me they got one launch where they were getting very close to the shuttle launch, and the roses hadn't arrived, and there were actually people discussing if they could delay the launch until the roses got there. Okay, I don't think that would have happened. I know it didn't happen, but they thought this was their good luck charm. And one of the shuttle mission flight controllers said that the Sheltons have sort of become a part of our team here in Mission Control. I can envision them in their home, just like I can envision the engineers in the conference room next to us. So this was an ongoing tradition from the first shuttle flight after the challenge and disaster all the way to the end. And what's really cool is now they started manned flights on the SpaceX stuff. This family is once again sending roses there. The tradition's been continued. So they're doing it for SpaceX as well. So I didn't know about that at all until I took this tour. It's just kind of neat. All righty, so that's going to be our visit to Mission Control, but we do have, or at least historic Mission Control, but we have one more stop on our tour here. As I told you earlier, there were 2 Mission Control centers built. The idea was to alternate between them. I don't know how much they did that, but the Mission Control that we were on is actually in the upper stories. Historic Mission Control is about 6 flights up. There was another Mission Control behind there, and when the shuttle program was discontinued, the second Mission Control, which was, again, originally designed for Apollo, identical to the first, was torn out, and it became Space Station Mission Control, International Space Station Mission Control, and it is still active. Now, ordinarily, you can't get in there. You will see the signs here on the elevator warning you that there is a flight freeze, which basically means we've got somebody in space and only authorized people are allowed to enter. Of course, since the ISS is not coming down, this whole section of the building is under a constant flight freeze. No one is allowed in there unless you have a pass, which they gave us. So as you go into that area, you can see who's sitting on the International Space Station. This is a list of all the people and the countries that are participating in this particular expedition. They call these expeditions, not missions. Outside this room, it lists the history of this room that we're about to enter, the Mission Control Room. It was originally called Mission Operations Control 1, like I told you, and the one upstairs was number 2. That's a historic one. And a list of all the missions and expeditions that have been run out of here. You'll notice that this particular room did Skylab and the Soyuz missions, a ton of shuttle missions, and almost all of the independent or the space station missions. There's one sad note on this. You'll note this first one, AS-201. For those who don't know, the AS-201, 203, and 202, the first one of those is better known as Apollo 1. Okay, Now they get control once the thing leaves the pad. It never did, but this was going to be the Apollo 1 mission control room. It never happened. These next two ones were unmanned. All these were unmanned flights. And out of respect for the widows involved, they asked for that Apollo 1 never be reused. So the Apollo 1 and the two numbers after it were just given these unmanned numbers, AS-203, 202, and that's why we pick up at Apollo 4. Okay. And this mission ran Apollo 4, 5, and 7. So a lot of history in this room, but all of those consoles are gone. This is an active control center, which, like I said, monitors the International Space Station. And it has the observation room. And so we were led into the observation room to observe them, the controllers controlling the International Space Station. We were told very clearly to speak softly because apparently they can hear us down there on the floor. We were obviously not allowed into this room. That would have been fun. But you could peek in and watch them. It depends on the time of day. If you take a tour and you get in here, and you get unlucky, there won't be anything on the screens because there's nothing much to see if they're on the dark side, for example. But if you catch it at the right time, there's all sorts of interesting things to see here. You can see it's if you looked at the other slides, you can see it's very similar in layout to the mission control downstairs, but of course all the consoles here are different. They learned a lot. You notice here these lit signs above every station, so you can see where everyone is at any given time. The signs. Oh, by the way, note the roses. The signs here also have little emblems. I remember one time I came through, I've been in this room twice, or this viewing chamber twice. The communications station, I can't remember what it's called, Capcom, I think, but they had a magic 8-ball sitting on top of their sign. Okay. But I can't tell you the stories of all these, but there are little things hidden all throughout here. It's little toys. There's a Jedi, there's a Yoda here somewhere. But all just, sort of jokes about what they do at that station. If we look here to the left, you're going to see the mirror. I believe this is the mirror here with the round section. That's the Russian spacecraft that they fly up. I don't know if you folks have been following the news, but this puppy got hit by a micrometeorite and depressurized, and it's just sort of sitting up there unusable right now. They're not sure what they're going to do with it. But, we saw a picture of it just hanging out. It's a real problem. I'm not sure if they're going to try to fix it, disconnect it, let it burn up in orbit. So maybe somebody here will tell me later on. But we can see that right there. And to the right, you can see other angles taken from the space station. They were very active. I don't know how much it takes to run this thing, but everyone there was very active. It was quite a busy room. If you look over here to the right, you'll see all these emblems. Okay, every mission and every expedition gets a patch. And I didn't point these out in historical mission control, but they're there too. If the flight was controlled, or a mission was controlled, or an expedition was controlled from that flight control room, they display the emblem up here. So all the emblems of everything they've ever controlled from this room are on display here. Like I said, historic mission control had them as well. Okay. Once again, just a quick shot to the side here, and you can see this is the same type of conference room we saw built in the 60s for Apollo. All righty, now I got a puzzle for you. This is one of the more fun things about being able to go in here. One of the people in this room is not like the other. There's someone here who really doesn't belong, and you probably can't see it from here, so I'm going to zoom in a little closer. Okay. Now, do you see something that's out of place? Someone's out of place, something wrong here. I doubt you're going to see it. They had to point it out to us. You got it, Darren. It's Gizmo, the Mogwai. He's hanging out on this pole. Now, he's there for a reason. If you remember, Mogwais, if you feed them after midnight and you get them wet, they create gremlins. And gremlins are not good things. Mogwais are sweet and gentle, but gremlins are not good things. The station has had the most challenges and issues that everybody had to work to resolve every day. It's the Mogwai. Okay, so if you have had challenges in your station, we used to, when I was in development, we had something called the sheep of shame. If you broke the code and caused every problem, the sheep of shame showed up on your desk until somebody else broke the code. They have something similar here. Here's the Mogwai. And so the poor people at the ethos station apparently have been having a rough day. And so there was a mogwai sitting there on their desk. And just one last view here before we leave of the International Space Station control. And I believe, yep, that is it. Aside from that, like I said, there's so much. This was a 3-stop tour, by the way, 3 buildings. And it took 3 hours to do everything you saw here. I'm leaving out probably half. And then if you go into the museums and the other tours they give, you would be begging me to stop. There's so much stuff. If you haven't been to Space Center Houston and Johnson Space Center, I highly recommend it. I also recommend the historic tour at Cape Canaveral. It's also outstanding. I have a picture of that if you ever want to see it. But that's it for me. Let's go ahead and take a look at the comments here.
Well, you're going through those, Don. Thanks. I really enjoyed it. I've been through the Missions Control Center at Cape Kennedy when I worked there, but I never made it out to Texas. So seeing the other side of once it got off the pad and the other guys that took it over, it's fascinating.
Yeah, it's to stand in that room and to realize, just what happened in that room. It really is. It's fascinating. And they've done such an amazing job of restoring it. One of my prized possessions actually sits on the bookcase behind me. I took part in the crowdfunding, and I got a signed thank you card from Gene Kranz.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's just like, and it wasn't me special. It was anybody who donated to it got a signed thank you card from Gene Kranz. Apparently, he's just that kind of guy. So it means a lot to them. Oh, by the way, if you look in the comments, folks, very first post I made, you're going to find a link that I posted. It's a link on the restoration of mission documentary up on PBS about the restoration of mission control. About 20 minutes long. Highly recommend you watch it and show what they went through to get this to happen. It's just amazing the amount of effort they did. And then they brought all these guys who were there back in, and it just, I kind of got a little got something in my eye while watching that. Yeah, I made the comment at 12:13.
That's pretty neat. See, there's a comment here. Scott was asking if they can do wheelchair tours through the mock-up shuttle. My guess would be looking at it, probably not.
Oh no, I'm afraid not. And they actually apologized about it on tour, but it's not designed to be toured. They only started letting people in recently after the thing was decommissioned. And yeah, you got to climb stairways and ladders and navigate some very tight spaces. So they just can't make that available. However, I do believe that the shuttle mock-up that sits on top of the plane outside, which is not a real shuttle, but it's very close. I believe that is accessible. I'm not certain. But no, the simulator shuttle is not, I'm afraid.
How about the rest of the tour through mission control? Is that wheelchair accessible?
Yeah, I believe it is. They have elevators to take you up, and it's a ramp down into mission control. I didn't see any problem. Mandy, do you see any problems with accessibility on the mission control room?
Sorry?
Do you remember if there was any accessibility issues for people in wheelchairs for mission control?
For historic mission control, I don't know if there was a ramp or if there were stairs.
Well, it was a ramp coming down the side because I took pictures off that ramp.
Okay.
Well, I can find out by pulling up the pictures again. I think mission control is fine. It's just that one room, that one, the simulator, it just wasn't designed for it. So.
Thank you.
No problem.
And Scott also asked, back in the day, how did they do the switch control from Florida to Texas? As I remember, there were basically dual feeds between the two centers, and if I recall it correctly, if Texas had gone offline, you could still do the job from Florida, but it was a big political issue. So they kept everything with dual control, and then they would switch it over, and you'd still see everything live in the Florida room. But that way, God forbid, a tornado or anything came by and took out the Texas room, which tornadoes were something they were concerned about. You still had the Florida room operational.
You can actually hear it in the broadcast when the flight controller in Houston takes the flight. And it's supposed to happen at the moment the shuttle clears the tower. But he'll say something like, this is Houston, we have you, or something like that, usually. They actually have, on the second tour, they have a mock-up of the space station. Somebody just posted that. And the neutral buoyancy tank facility. The reason I said take the morning tour is that's the one that goes into the mock-up of the shuttle and or the simulation of the shuttle and the mission control. The afternoon tour takes you to the buoyancy facility with the space station there as well. So if it depends on what you're interested in. Actually, you can do both, but you're going to come away a lot poorer.
How much do they charge for this?
I believe 250 a piece.
Okay.
It ain't cheap, but it's if you're a space fan, I literally can't recommend it highly enough. It's just phenomenal. And if you don't want to spend $250, you still get to see mission control from the observation room. So, it's close. So,
That's really neat. I've worked on submarines, and one of my projects was building submarine simulators, and we had the entire thing where we would train the crews, but it was all in a giant gimbal assembly, and you could tilt and rock and do all that sort of thing on it. And again, just trying to figure out every possible thing that you could go wrong, and then train the guys on how, if this light shows up, what do you do and everything. I was having real flashbacks to the scenario meetings we would have, and it'd be by a bunch of devils. What if we did this to them?
Now, as I recall, Bill, you can correct me about this. Florida had the launch control, and then they had a mission control room of their own, a separate building. That's since been torn down, and they've moved it into their museum there, so you can see it. And they do the same thing of walking through the thing with the audio and all the consoles. But so Florida had their own mission control until Apollo, I think it was. And that's when they switched.
Somewhere in my boxes of stuff, I have a panel that says astronaut communicator panel that mysteriously fell off a console into my kit bag one day.
Wow.
Yeah, so I've got that sitting upstairs in the bedroom closet in case NASA ever wants it back.
I wouldn't admit that over the internet. They're liable to come find you.
Well, I'm not giving.
We actually have. Pardon me.
I'm not giving back any of the rocks.
Oh, I didn't mention. It's sort of a side topic, but they have, of course, lunar rocks at Space Center Houston, and you can actually touch one. They have one out in display just for that purpose. But it is also the room where those are. If you go through, there's a big sign that says Lunar Soil Vault. And that room is one of the most secure rooms in the world. Apparently, they had them in just a normal room, and they were studying them. And then one day, somebody noticed that a lunar rock, several lunar rocks had gone up for sale on eBay. And it turns out one of the employees at the museum, Mandy, could you call from the Hound, please? That one of the museum employees had gone in and just grabbed them. Nothing stopped them. So they went through and completely refitted that. So now this is the most secure. Good luck getting a rock out of there now, in case you have any ideas. So
amazing. Yeah, but you got to take something like that, put it on eBay. As my daughter, when she was a DA, said they told her first day at work, we never catch the smart ones.
Yeah, it's just like, gee, no one's going to be suspicious that I have a lunar rock.
Yeah, actually, the story is worse than that, Don. It was a student intern that did it, and also took some of the paperwork and research papers that had been done on those rocks and stole it all and tried to sell it. And it goes down from there. Astronaut Hoot Gibson gives a really good talk about, or did give a really good talk about, the appalling theft, because it ruined several years of science research too.
Oh yeah, because once those things have been out in the air and touched, they were useless now.
Well, let me just ask you scientists to know, I mean, how does anybody know that what I'm holding up here is not a lunar rock? I mean, this is a lunar rock. I want $1 million for it. Prove it's not.
You just you just compared the chemical makeup of the rock, They've done extensive surveys on what the chemicals are, what the minerals are in the rock, and they can compare it to that and say, yeah, this is a lunar rock, or no, it's not.
Well, if you give me the $1 million, I'll let you test it.
Well, if you want the $1 million, you're going to let them test it. Actually, if you hold it up in front of somebody, they're going to probably have some nice gentleman in uniform come talk to you.
Well, this is a special rock. It's one Carol painted for me. I use on my desk as a paperweight. So
Oh, that comes from that comes from the loony moon, right?
yeah, no, it's a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. So
Now they're going to come after Carol for painting a lunar rock.
yeah, well, that's great. Again, I've never been to that one. I've worked in the one in Florida, and you always hear about the other brother on the other side of the country, but to actually see it was really kind of neat. And it's only Monday through Friday, huh?
Only Monday through Friday. 14 or older. Anyone under 18 must be accompanied by an adult. Those are their things, and only if you like I said, for each tour the max is 16. And they divide you up in 2 groups of 8 because only 8 people can get in that dang shuttle simulator at one time. We were packed in like sardines.
Wayne has his hand up for you.
Hey, Wayne. Oh, you're muted, Wayne.
Doesn't show as muted, but we don't hear you, Wayne. All right, he's doing a simulated failure here, and we need to wire.
So Don, why
There
is it
you are.
necessary to transfer control of the mission from Florida to Texas? Why do they have to do that?
Because
just because. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, basically they had, again, politics became the whole big thing. Why do they need anything in Texas? They needed to build a space center because you had a launch control room, and back at that time you were having multiple missions underway. You can remember when they did the 2 Gemini missions and they went and met in space. They decided they needed to have a bigger room to control it, one room to launch it, one room to control it, and politics put it in Texas. It could have been in New Jersey, it could have been anywhere. So it was just basically one room gets it up, the other room takes care of it. Now they're getting it up, room starts getting ready for the next mission to get it all up and running. So
But wouldn't it have made sense to keep it all under one roof in one physical location?
it might have, but again, politics. And they also had the issue again, just like they wanted to make sure that Florida could back up Texas if a tornado hit Texas. They wanted to make sure that if a hurricane hit Florida, that there was another thing to be geographically dispersed. So it made ideal sense to have 2 rooms. Just Texas was because Johnson was president. That's basically it.
Oh yeah, I mean, yeah, it was a huge feather in his cap, and I think for him to sign on to the whole program, he demanded that this. There's an interesting story, by the way, about Space Center or the Johnson Space Center, which is the official government thing instead of Space Center Houston, which is the museum. When they built it, Rice University donated all the land. Actually, they sold it to them for $1, I think it was. But they had a stipulation, and they kind of outsmarted themselves. They thought, they basically stipulated that since this whole space program thing probably isn't going to last, it'd be a shame to waste the land. So they demanded NASA build everything on the campus so that it could be used as a university campus. So if you go there on the property, it's like fooling around a university. Okay, Rice never got their land back because guess what? We're still using it. But every building there can be converted to college classrooms and labs if need be and become part of Rice University. That was their condition for donating the land.
Interesting. Wayne, did you get your sound back?
Nope.
No.
I'm sorry.
Bill, I was going to say on that last comment about the Rice University thing, it's sort of like the Disney studio. Disney, in order to get the money to build a studio, had to build it so that it could be converted to a hospital if he wasn't successful. If you look at the old buildings, they were very much laid out like a hospital would be, with a central corridor and all these little offices off each side, or what would have been patient rooms.
Yeah, even in the lobby of our wing, the area where we had all of our photocopiers looked exactly like a hospital reception, a nursing station.
Exactly.
You know, one thing that was interesting was you were going through the whole thing with all the wires. When we were doing the submarines simulators, we could actually go out on the submarines and do a simulated fault on board the subs. But we would take a memory card or something that had been doctored up to have a fault in it. And we realized that they would put it in there and the guys could find it real easy because it had a big orange stripe on it. So in case they had gotten a war alert, they could have pulled out anything with an orange stripe and put the real board back. So I got the job of how did you simulate through software all the failures rather than come up with gimmick memory boards. And we had to have a program that if they ever got the war alert, push the button and reset all the things we had screwed up in the system. So, you know, it'd be interesting to know how much this stuff they did in the shuttle was done through hardware simulation or through software simulation for faults.
Yeah, I imagine they did a lot through software simulation as well, but they didn't get into too much detail about, you know, how they actually simulated failures and how they did the training.
Don, I wanted to ask you a question. Oh, wait a minute, Wayne's there. Go ahead, Wayne.
Yeah. It's an old engineering axiom. It works better if you turn it on. Anyway, I was wondering what kind of camera you used on the tour.
Actually, just my iPhone, sir. You didn't, in the environments we were in, that were often real cramped and we were a group moving around, really didn't have time. There were a few people with nicer cameras, but I just used my iPhone 12 Pro and it worked out very nicely for me. So
It came out well. Did you need a flash for most of the shots or?
no, couldn't use, oh gosh, that was embarrassing.
Right.
I accidentally turned on the flash during the lunar landing presentation at command at mission control. I took one picture and this flash, I thought my guys were coming right out of their shoes. It was just an accident. But no, you can't use flash anywhere in the facility. Another rule is you can't take pictures except for ISS mission control. You're not allowed to take pictures of any employee on site. I have some pictures from previous trips of people actually working in that shuttle simulator. And I didn't know I wasn't supposed to take them, but I couldn't share them here because there were people in them.
Actually, Don, that's really true. We had a tour because I was meeting with one of the astronauts about something and we were in the neutral buoyancy and he mentioned that he'd gotten permission for us to take pictures of him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I didn't realize that was a permission issue.
Yeah, they're trying very hard to protect their privacy, basically. We got two people with hands up. Who we got here?
Baron? Baron, if you got a question.
Yes. Yeah, I got a question. Your perception of the room, you know, when I was kid, it looked big, it looked massive, it looked awesome. And of course I've seen the pictures of the restoration and it seems just small and minute compared to what I had imagined it as a child. Did you have that same perception? Or because the one thing you noticed that you'd mentioned that the front third of the room was empty, you know,
empty space.
Yeah, it was big. But overall, was your perception of the room bigger than what you thought or smaller than what you thought perhaps as a kid?
Well, it's kind of mixed. I didn't expect that big empty space at the front because when you're viewing it from the observation room, you don't really get the sense that that space is that large. As for the rest of the room, it was pretty much what I was expecting. In my case, maybe slightly larger. I didn't see it as small, no, but I'd been in that observation room a ton of times. And so I had a good idea of what the dimensions of the room were like, except for the front, which you can't see clearly. So, you know, I can understand though, when you're a kid, everything is larger and there's so much amazing things going in there. I can see how you might think it was larger than it was. But for me, it seemed about right.
Okay, thanks.
No problem.
And Brock has his hand up.
Yeah, just sounds funny, but I want to go back to the cigarette trays and the cigarette butts in them. I understand that they had to be verified, but they were verified because they were stuck underneath the equipment.
Yeah.
Obviously, not necessarily all from Apollo 11, could have been from many missions. I would wonder, might there be a lion's share or a lot more of them from Apollo 13 and any of the others? If you understand what I'm asking.
Oh, I'm betting. Yeah, I mean, they talked about the smoking, and the more stress was in there, the more smoke, obviously. Yeah, you're right. They can't go back, and each one isn't stamped with a little mission number. But so they can tell that some of them are from the 11 or 13 era, that time frame, just by the type of cigarette, which you can generally determine. The rule was nothing that wasn't there during Apollo 11. Well, there are a couple of cases where the roses were later, the plaque was later. So they stayed pretty tight to it. But if something that belongs there, regardless if it's Apollo 11, and I thought it was a neat addition, it made it in anyway. But most of the stuff there is genuine. If you watch the documentary, they'll talk about the search they went on to find things.
Isn't cigarette smoke not bad for computers?
I'm sorry.
Smoke does not like it to be in the vicinity of a computer. It's
Yeah.
the electronics in it.
Oh yeah, it's a bad idea. And they won't do it now. You didn't see anybody smoking in the International Space Station, but back then everybody smoked. It's just no one even thought about it. If you go to the Florida historical tour, the historical tour from Cape Canaveral, and that's a very specific tour that's only often a few days a week, and you have to get a security clearance to take it. They'll take you into the launch control for the original Mercury flights. John Shepard's the pad where John Shepard was launched, where Alan Shepard. Yeah, I'm sorry. My wife is correcting my verbal dyslexia. But built into the launch consoles are ashtrays. They're actually built in as part of it. Again, if you folks are interested, I have a ton of photos from that. That's a fascinating. The thing that amazed me was the launch controls were about maybe 200, 300 feet from the rockets. I mean, they were right there. Eventually somebody decided that wasn't such a great idea, but they were right up on them. And you get to go in there, you actually get to push the button that launched the first one. That's a great set of tours as well.
I was just looking at a picture. Let me find this for you real quick. You were talking about that. 1 second here. Let me pull this up real quick. This is back in 1964. You could take a tour of the Kennedy, of the Cape Kennedy, or whatever it was called back at that point. Here, share screen. And one of the things that you could walk in, and this was again the stuff sitting right there, and you could walk up and push all the buttons and do everything you want. Now, of course, they've protected it, but again, that's the one. Push the button and off he goes. So fascinating.
Yeah, they've got it covered with a thing of plexiglass now, but there's a hole where you can push the button.
Right. Yeah. So
Have you been to the Space Center in Huntsville, Alabama?
I'm sorry.
I said, have you ever been to the Space Center in Huntsville, Alabama?
I have, but it's been 45 years, so I need to go back.
I was there just about a year ago, and it looked like it was all ancient technology from 40 or 50 years ago. It kind of reminded me how sad the space program is, what it used to be like and what we have today. You're just looking at antiques.
Well, it did the job. Scott, you had something?
Yeah, can you put me on screen share for a minute? Because I have an actual photo showing the console.
Sure, 1 second.
From Florida.
Yeah, that historical tour in Florida.
It was amazing.
Yeah.
It was very nice.
Yeah, I mean, you go to all the early launch sites, and then you also stop off at the pad where Apollo 1 was. And there's a memorial set up there, and that's it's kind of hard to see.
Bill, you're just gonna have to talk me. All right, share screen. Do you guys see it?
All right, you got it. First try.
There you go. So this is through glass, so you've got a little reflection. This was a couple of years ago. My wife and I were going to Cuba and we stopped off in Florida on the cruise. But I was amazed at the detail, wrong way, sorry, of how well they had done the restoration.
Mm-hmm.
Just bear with me 1 minute, please.
No problem. Yeah, they're mission control right there. Oh, yep, cigarette pack.
There you go. And I'm sure a few of us remember the Raleigh points to get free gifts.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, that was quite interesting. And IBM was there.
Mm-hmm.
It's amazing. And again, all over the place where there were cigarettes.
Yep.
You know, it's
It was
interesting, though, you think about thanks, Scott. You think about it there, the coffee cups, the fact that you're going to spill the coffee cup into the module. I mean, it just made me think of, you know, you shouldn't put things like liquid near computers and stuff like that. I mean, today, I would hope if you look at when you were at the room today, Don, do they have any coffee cups or water bottles or anything in the modern room today?
Oh, well, I don't know actually, but I can take a quick look. I think that they had some. I thought I saw some coffee cups. Let me go back to the slideshow here. Click exit and grab that slide.
Do you guys remember the famous skit on Saturday Night Live of the 3 Mile Island? Yeah,
Jimmy
Pepsi
Carter.
syndrome. Yeah, I mean, I remember when I first went on one of the subs. I don't drink coffee, and they gave me a cup of coffee that was like so hot it would melt your fillings. And I thought I'd be very clever and just put it down someplace, and I put it on top of one of the pieces of equipment which had cooling fans, and I figured that would cool off the thing. And the chief was, "Oh no, you don't want to let your coffee cool off. Drink it like a man." My tongue is still burned, but you know, he wasn't worried that I was putting the coffee cup on top of the thing because it was going to pour into the computer. He was worried it would cool it off too much for me.
Yeah, let me see if I can find this. NASA.
Well, you know, something that, you know, when Barron was talking about the size of the room and the stuff and the size of the equipment, you know, those tables and the huge cooling cabinets, essentially, that all the computer equipment was invented for keeping it cool because the way the computers were then, and you compare it to watching a launch today of, say, SpaceX, and it's just tabletops with laptops on them.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, and they're so much more powerful than what they were doing there.
Oh yeah, it so much has changed. Yeah, I'm gonna go, Bill. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen again.
You should be able to.
Yep, I'm doing it. And take a look there, right above the word Eva. This is the ISS station.
Yeah,
That looks like a big gulp to me.
well, right here, I see on the screen next to the blonde-haired lady, there's a soda bottle sitting right there.
Yep, and then the guy has a big gulp right near the Eva sign.
Yep.
The coffee mug. Yeah, they're not smoking, but it's. I guess that they, you know, they're keeping. Well, this guy has a computer open. Yeah, I'm surprised.
Even here,
There are
just at my
laptops.
house, from having knocked too many water cups over, I only have a water bottle on my desk, so if it falls over, it's not going to do anything. I'm just really amazed they let him do that. That's really something.
Yeah, I am amazed that no one thought about the damage that smoking did, because you know that lays a film of nicotine over everything, and that can short your circuit boards. So, I guess it was just such a given that you smoked that no one thought about it. But that, you know, obviously they don't do it now. But yeah, I am surprised there's a Coke bottle here too.
Yeah.
Apparently, like everyone, they need their caffeine when you're in this business.
Yeah. Tom says the equipment's
Say,
been
Bill,
paid
you
for.
don't drink coffee?
Nah, it keeps you awake. No, yeah, I love the smell of coffee. I go on a camping trip in the morning and you get, you know, eggs frying, bacon, coffee. Smells great. Just never picked up the affinity for it.
And they let you in the police station like that?
Yeah. You know, it's funny you mentioned that you can't take pictures of everybody. the LAPD just released all the pictures of all the police officers, and now it's a giant mess this past week. And I was just wishing that, some of our brass was smart enough, like, the NASA people not letting people take pictures. But no, matter of fact, at the station, there's a little store you can buy stuff as you're going out, and they have what you call it, water bottles and juice bottles and energy drinks or whatever, but not coffee, because people use that as the excuse to get out of the car, stretch their legs, and go in some place and use the facilities. So there's a couple coffee spots at the station with big signs about, if you're not a member of the coffee club, don't take our coffee. And you don't want you
Very
don't want to
protective
piss
of
off
their
people
coffee.
that carry guns, so you don't take their coffee. Well, great, Don. I appreciate it. When are you coming out our way again?
Let me see. I gotta get my calendar out. It's gonna be in June, where Mandy and I are actually getting ready to start making. We don't make many reservations, but we're gonna make what few reservations we make this week. Let's see. Work April, May, June. So interesting. I believe. I'll have to double check, but I believe it's the 11th, 12th, and 13th. Actually, no, because I noticed one started on a Saturday. That'd probably be a bad day to meet. 10th, 11th, and 12th, I think. But let me check it.
Yeah, that's fine. Let me know. If it's on a Saturday, we can meet out at the Santa Monica Pier, and you could talk to everybody from the end of Route 66.
Yeah, that's true. We could do a live broadcast at the Santa Monica Pier.
All right.
So,
well, thanks. Appreciate it. As people in the chat are also thanking you, Don. It's really appreciated. I mean, I'd love to go back and see that room. The aura, as you mentioned, the history has made it. And you think about, Kranz and some of these decisions that that team had to come up with and do. It's, talk about under pressure. My God.
Is Gene Kranz still alive today?
oh yeah. Yeah, he's still there. As a matter of fact, he shows up every now and then, just shows up. The tour guides say they run into him in the grocery store all the time.
He probably
So he
doesn't
still
have to
lives at the
buy a
same
ticket.
area, too.
I think he just had a birthday this past couple weeks.
Yeah, I think so, but I don't remember when his birthday was specifically.
Yeah, how old do you think he'd be by now?
He's in his 90s, would be my guess. Let's see.
He was born in 1933.
Yeah.
Oh,
Wow.
so 90s.
90.
90.
Yeah.
Does he have the rest of the vests that his wife made?
I think some of them are in the Smithsonian. Then there's this one. I don't know if he has any more.
Yes.
I think the one he wore during Apollo 11 is in the Smithsonian, though.
I think the 13 vest is there also. But I'm not sure.
You might be right. The only one I saw on display was the 17. So, but
Now,
could be there.
maybe you can.
All right. Well, his birthday was in August, so I'm a few months behind. But anyhow.
Now, I had heard that the mock-up filter that they had made, they had called the mailbox. Did you ever hear that story?
The which one?
The filter for 13.
Okay, they didn't know. I haven't heard of that. They didn't mention it, but that doesn't mean much. It's quite possible.
Okay.
I found the vest. I'm trying to figure out where it's located. Oh, 13. Yeah, it's at the 13 vest is in the Air and Space Museum in Washington.
Okay, so it's part of Smithsonian.
Yeah, it's a white
Yeah,
vest.
there's actually a page on it at NASA. I can stick a link in there about the mailbox. Let me put that in the chat.
They call it the mailbox. They didn't mention that.
One of my mentees who's going for Eagles, deep into Apollo history, and when I had sent him an email about this, so he's probably going to be watching this tonight. He's really into it. But what was also interesting in Florida, quite a few had slide rulers on their desk, and they said they actually were still using slide rulers.
Mhm.
back then.
I have on the bookcase over here to my right, my father's slides ruler. He worked on the original Mariner missions. Yeah, the first interplanetary probe my dad was on it. And I have his slide rule over here. So, but yeah, they still use a lot of slide rules in those days.
Yeah.
I think I still have one, and last time I took it out, the ability to use it had escaped me.
It was a
Well, that
project.
was
to learn how to
amazing.
use those things. They weren't easy to operate. You had to figure out where the decimal point goes when you get your numeric answer.
Yeah.
Say, Don,
Yes.
can you say anything about the recreation of all the displays? My understanding is that none of the actual monitors could be saved, and they have installed flat panel screens, and of course the information displayed is accurate, but it had to be all reprogrammed to duplicate the actual mission.
And I'm checking something right now to answer your question. I know that some of the screens were replaced. I don't know that all were. And if you watch that documentary, you can actually see them working on the screens, and they talk about some of it. I think some of them did make it forward, but I won't swear on that.
Yeah, I think they had real problems that, they could put new capacitors in, get things working, but the actual tubes in a bunch of cases, I think, were sourcing was becoming a real challenge.
The antique TV collectors know about this problem because there are no more tube restorers anywhere in the world, except there may be one or two in Russia or China, but the last one in the free world closed about 10 years ago.
Mhm.
Well, you
And,
think about things we've lost the ability. I mean, just, it's stuff like if you had a roll of Kodachrome film, you can't get it developed anymore. I mean, a bunch of the early Polaroid cameras, you can't get film or anything because the entire factories and everything shut down, and all the lore and everything lost on how to do some of that stuff. So
Wayne, I'm looking through my pictures where I took close-ups of the screens. And the ones I can see, they sure look like they were LED hidden behind a glass thing, just because the angle gives it away, right?
Yeah.
I see a flat plane behind the glass. Like I said, if you look at that link, they'll talk about the restoration work they did, and they talk about some of those things. And they may answer you there. I think, if not all of them, most of them were replaced. You're right.
You had one picture with a TV off to the right that looked to me like the real thing. But
that is the real thing.
And all the console screens are not filled. They have square sides, on the images.
Yeah, and that square sides would not be. Yeah, the screens display the same information exactly, but I can't tell you that those are the screens. Actually, they're displaying a blue image. Those would not be. I hadn't noticed that until now, but those would not be blue. They'd be green. Would they? They just used CRT displays, not color displays. I don't know.
Oh, but they would use white tubes, I think.
Oh, okay. So
yeah, there's a fellow I know, Mike Okuda, did a lot of work on working at restoration project. I'll try to track him down and see what information he might want to share on a future day.
oh yeah, that would be cool. I mean, yeah. It won't be designing the interface for the Enterprise, but it's
Maybe we could get to talking about LCARs. He's
Yeah.
a super guy.
Oh yeah, that would be neat. I'd love to see what he has to say. But yeah, I know they replaced some, Wayne. They may have replaced all, because what you're saying is correct. Nobody can handle those anymore. So, and to be honest, I do know they pulled a lot of switches out too, and had to rebuild the switches. They talk about that because the ones they had just were beyond recovery, and so they had to actually build new ones from scratch, and there was no one able to do it. They actually had to do it themselves because they couldn't find anyone capable of doing it. So
They may have had to replace a ton of incandescent bulbs with LEDs.
yeah, they didn't talk about the lighting. They talked about, and then I mean, everything they talked about that they did restore, they were trying to match exactly, but it wasn't always possible to get the exact same thing. So they brought it back to as close as they could. And boy, howdy, we were read the riot act. We couldn't even touch the walls. We were not allowed to lean on the walls.
Don, I noticed there were a couple of cameras hanging from the ceiling in that room. Were those security cameras or were those replication of what was in there before?
If I were a betting man, those are security cameras, because I don't think they had the security cameras that small back in the day.
I wondered if those could be projectors, because I had a question about the big displays that if they originally were rear projectors.
And they still
I wonder if they've substituted front projectors, because the old, you talk about the obsolete technology, the old rear projectors were really monsters that had projection tubes that had to be pumped down with a vacuum pump before use, and had limited lifetime.
Yeah, I don't think they're using the same projectors, but they are still rear projecting. Of course, we've got rear projectors now that are cheap and easy, but they are definitely projecting. They actually talked about that. They're rear projecting on the other side of this room. On the other side of the screens is a room almost as big just for the projectors.
Oh, that's great.
So, and that's what makes me think these are security cameras. We were warned that, I mean, they actually give you a pretty good range around the room. You can't get to the console, but we were warned not to touch anything, not to do something that's sneaky, because the people would be there. So I'm sure we were being watched. And that camera there, I'm going to zoom in. Oh yeah. Okay, I'm zooming in on the camera.
They
that's
sure
looking
look
down
like
there.
it.
Pardon me?
I said they
That-
sure
that
look
is-
like it. They look like other cameras I've seen at other installations, and they swivel
Yeah.
around. And
Yeah, that is not a historic camera. I recognize. I used to write. I was in the security industry, my first programming job, and that camera motion control mount and the camera that's hooked up. That's all very modern stuff. So, just to put security in there, I'm sure that's what it's there for.
We took a tour a number of years ago at Hearst Castle, and one of the things they tell you is don't go beyond the rope, don't touch anything, don't do anything. And my friend Bill Troop had his son there. I think Alan was maybe 7 years old or something. And Alan said, "Oh, you can't do this." And he put his foot out under the rope, stepped on the property he wasn't supposed to, and the bells went off. And I don't know what was the faster reaction, the bells going off or Bill smacking Alan on the back of the head. And, the rest of the tour, Alan was very much behaved himself. Oh, yeah, Scott wants to know, is the photo behind me what the view looks like once the rainwater starts flowing? I sure as hell hope not. Well, thanks, Don. Again, appreciate it. Next week, we're going to probably be back to home movies. And how many folks are fans of the Sinclair dinosaurs from the '64 fair? I've got a movie that I just restored that is really great, a Super 8 movie, so much better quality than just an 8. But it's the dinosaurs out on the tour that they took where they went to the shopping malls. And the guy got all the pictures of the dinosaurs, including a flying dinosaur going around a bunch of eggs. But then he said, "Oh, I'm going to photograph and film how one of the Mold-O-Matic machines makes a dinosaur and stuff." So it's just all sorts of really neat, for geeky type of details of watching the guy, and he gets an orange dinosaur that comes down the chute and everything. So we'll also have the usual mix of Disneyland. I got a bunch more. I just did of Knott's Berry Farm, and if I finish up this week, we'll be going to Spokane and looking at the Expo 74. It's really interesting that you would think as you get into Expo 74, more recent, there'd be a whole bunch of stuff. Well, you can see why Kodak's times went down, because in the 60s, everybody was taking movies. 70s, people were taking movies. By the time you got the 80s and 90s, people weren't taking movies as much anymore. And this was really in the days before even the, Expo 7, that was 74. So video wasn't still a big thing, but you try to find a movie of Hemisphere or Expo 74 or some of these later exhibitions, they don't show up anywhere as much as things like 64 or Expo 67. So, but we'll have some fun with that. So appreciate everybody coming. Thanks again, Don. And I was geeking out. I was really enjoying it.
Thanks a lot. It was a lot of fun to show the pictures.
Thanks, Don. It was a great presentation. I enjoyed it. By the way, some of those dinosaurs ended up in your area. They're down in Glen Rose, Texas. They got a T-Rex and the Brontosaurus is there.
Yep. Yeah, they're the original ones from the fair, and they had done a terrible job of repainting them at one point in time, and then the Texas State Park Commission got in touch with me and asked about pictures of how they looked at the fair, and I gave it that. And if you go to the museum, they've actually got a couple of the pictures there with a little thanks Bill Cotter for showing us that at the fair. So. They also had at one point decided that the Brontosaurus head was inaccurate, so they took it off, put on a more accurate head, and everybody yelled and screamed that they, it didn't look like the Brontosaurus, because I think it's actually called a something elsesaurus. So they actually had to put the World's Fair head back on it to bring it back to the way that everybody remembered it from the fair.
And most of the natural history museums throughout the country, they're replacing the head of the Brontosaurus now.
Yeah,
the Smithsonian did that. They had the wrong head all these years.
Hey, 100 years from now,
with a
people are
little
going to be
head.
looking at what we did and thinking how silly we were.
Mm-hmm.
You guys ever seen the book somebody did about a visit to a motel?
Oh yeah, Motel of Mysteries.
Yes. Yeah, they go to a motel, and the theory is that it's 100 years or 200 years from now, they go through a motel, and the learned scientists are all discussing what sanitize for your protection meant, or what magic fingers actually did, but they write up this whole book as it was, the mysteries of a sealed, like King Tut's tomb sort of thing.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Yeah. Well, great. We'll see. Hopefully, see you folks next week, and hopefully the rain will slow down here. Actually, it's a beautiful looking day outside, looking out the window right now. So, we'll see how it goes. We have a big 12K run on Thursday, and it's supposed to rain, so we'll see what happens with that.
Hey, Bill, before you go,
Yeah.
what was at the auction?
Oh, the auction, it's underway right now. If you really want to go spend a bunch of money, the Heritage Auctions has a huge Disney theme park sale today and tomorrow. You can actually go buy a whole monorail car if you want one. But they had just a ton of neat stuff, and they had a very, very small portion of it on display at their offices we went to on Thursday night. But it was really neat. Most, a bunch of old tickets and photos and stuff like that. But just all sorts of things, like why would somebody have saved a piece of the trunk from an elephant from the Jungle Cruise when they did a rehab and put it on a big plaque? You could go buy that. But they had all sorts of really neat stuff. I mean, you try to figure out, how does some of this stuff get out of the door? You like talk about people stealing moon rocks or stuff like that. It was like they had a big console, about yay big or so, of the background sound mixer for the theme park. So you could turn up the music, the background loop in Tomorrowland, or turn it down in Fantasyland. Where it went, how it got there in the museum or anything, you don't know, but they had some really cool stuff. The catalog, if you go to ha.com, their whole catalog's online. You can go through everything, and the auction's underway today. So if you go broke buying anything, don't blame me. Great stuff. We'll see you guys next week then.
See you next week.
Everybody.
Thanks, Lou.
Next Saturday.
All right, bye.
Bye.